It happened during one of the night shifts at Walmart when the store was almost empty, and the light barely reflected off the shelves standing in the shadows. A few employees could be seen doing their tasks, and some customers were making their last-minute purchases. Everything seemed normal until a woman entered. She looked anxious, her face pale, and her eyes filled with fear. The woman approached the guard standing at the entrance and nervously asked, "Have you seen my son? He's only 9 years old, he went shopping 20 minutes ago, and I can't find him." The guard looked at her with concern, realizing that the situation was serious. He began scanning the area, but no one could say where the boy was. Time passed, and the search yielded no results. The woman explained how her son loved coming to the store, but this time everything was different. He wasn't answering his calls, and searching for him in the store had become more difficult. The guard decided to call in other employees, and together they headed to the monitors, where they could check the surveillance cameras. Everyone stood in silence, waiting for the footage to load, until the images finally appeared on the screen. And there he was, the boy, caught on camera in the main aisle. He was walking casually, but then his gait became odd. He turned his head toward a dark corridor that led to the stockroom and seemed to intend to enter it. As soon as the boy disappeared around the corner, the camera immediately showed an empty space. There was no sign of him, nor any indication of what he did next. They all watched the footage several times, but couldn't make sense of what had happened. The woman told the guard that her son sometimes didn't listen but wasn't prone to running away or hiding. The decision was clear, they had to check that corridor, but what would they find there? The woman grew increasingly anxious, and the guard also looked troubled. As they reviewed the footage, a new detail appeared that no one had noticed before. On the image, when the boy, Alex, was walking toward the stockroom, a man appeared in one of the dark corridors. He seemed to materialize out of nowhere, unnoticed, and disappeared behind the stockroom doors, heading in the same direction as Alex. The guard paused the video again. The man was not very distinct, but there was something odd about his posture. At first, the guard thought he might just be a warehouse worker, but soon he noticed that the man was wearing a black tracksuit with a hood that concealed most of his face. The guard began to sense that something was wrong and quickly sent the video to the other employees. The woman stood beside him, nervously watching the screens as the guard decided to take action. They headed toward the stockroom where Alex had last appeared on the camera. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty store, and with each step, the woman grew more uneasy. They reached the spot where Alex had entered the stockroom. A thin layer of dust covered the floor, untouched by any footprints. The guard cautiously opened the stockroom door and peered inside, but it was only darkness. However, right behind the door was another corridor that led deeper into the darker part of the stockroom. "We shouldn't go any further," the woman said, her voice trembling with fear. The guard seemed to have no choice. He turned on his flashlight and took a few steps forward. As soon as they moved deeper, the same man appeared again. This time, he stood at the end of the corridor, holding something heavy in his hands, possibly a bag. He turned his head and looked at them curiously, but didn't say a word. His gaze was cold and empty. The woman approached him, asking, "Have you seen my son?" "He was here, he went shopping." The man didn't respond, only slowly, as if nothing was unusual, turned and walked back into the darkness, not looking at them. The guard, sensing something was off, started to follow him, but after they had passed several corridors, the man disappeared again. The woman was in a panic, and her cries echoed through the empty halls of the stockroom. She could no longer leave the matter unfinished. But then, something unexpected happened. Suddenly, the guard saw the man emerge from the stockroom and head toward a large black car parked near the back exit of the store. He approached the driver's seat, got in, and the car drove off into the night. In that moment, the guard realized, this man was the key to the mystery. But how was all of this connected to Alex? The woman, in panic, turned to the guard, trying to figure out what to do next. They had only a few minutes to find the boy, but the more they searched, the more questions remained unanswered. Why had the men led them to the car? Was he just a passerby, Or was he part of a larger, more dangerous game? The guard quickly pulled out his phone and called the police. He provided all the information he could gather, the car's number, a description of the men, and what had happened in the store. It seemed that everything was moving toward a resolution, but when the police checked the car's registration, they made a horrifying discovery. The car had been stolen several days ago, and it had been involved in several other similar incidents, but with no real evidence or witnesses. The police decided to investigate more thoroughly, including the possible connection of this man to other crimes. Meanwhile, the guard couldn't leave the woman without support as she was under immense stress and confused. They waited together for the police, trying to figure out where the boy had gone. His phone still hadn't responded to calls. The police arrived a few minutes later and immediately began their investigation. They sent several patrols to check the surroundings, and one of the detectives approached the guard and started questioning him. "Are you sure this man wasn't just a random passerby?" the detective asked, reviewing the surveillance footage again. "I don't believe that. He was heading exactly where the boy was last seen. And he didn't even turn around when we approached." The police continued to check all possible routes, but the investigation had not yielded concrete results yet. At the same time, the guard couldn't ignore one more detail. On one of the screens, he saw the men turn down a corridor that led to another exit from the store. It was an unremarkable path that only a few employees used, and it led to a remote area beyond the parking lot. "I saw him turn there." "This matters," said the guard, trying to remain calm. "We need to check that part of the stockroom." The police headed in that direction. A few minutes later, they reached an abandoned stockroom that looked neglected and unused. It was a place that virtually no one ever visited. At the entrance, the detectives found a few tracks leading inside. The air was cool, and the silence around them was deafening. However, when they stepped inside, everything began to make sense. Before them were walls with inscriptions that seemed like ancient graffiti, but with a particular purpose. One of them had clear diagrams that indicated the route the boy had taken. "This place can't be a coincidence," one of the detectives said. "Someone left their traces here." And suddenly, faint sounds echoed from the darkness, seeming like shadows from the far end of the stockroom. Without hesitation, the guard moved toward the sound, walking cautiously and making no noise. The police followed him, their faces showing vague concern. As they got closer, they found a small room filled with boxes and items that looked like remnants of old cargo. And in that dark room, they saw Alex. He was sitting on the floor, looking confused and frightened but seemingly unharmed. The guard rushed over to him and asked, "Alex, are you okay? What happened? Why are you here?" The boy looked at him and whispered, "I was going shopping, and then I met that man. He told me I had to go with him. I couldn't turn back. He said that if I stayed, something bad would happen." It turned out that everything was much more complicated than it seemed at first. The man involved in the car theft wasn't just following Alex, he was looking for a way to use him for his dark plans. But why? "I have been working as a security guard at Walmart for several years. Working at night had long become routine for me, but tonight everything felt different. The windy, almost winter-like breeze howled around me, and the night swallowed everything up, leaving only the glow of the Walmart sign and the sounds from inside the store. I stepped outside to take a break and have a smoke when I noticed a group of teenagers playing near the store. They were laughing, like most kids at this hour, and cheerful shouts escaped their mouths. At one point, my attention was drawn to a black van that suddenly stopped near them. I couldn't say exactly why, but it seemed suspicious. The van was completely black, with no markings, its windows tinted, and it was parked too close to the entrance. The driver rolled down the window, and I saw him speaking to the kids. Then two of the teenagers climbed into the van without hesitation, while one, seemingly calmed down, ran towards the store. Something felt off, and I immediately sensed that the situation was spiraling out of control. Without wasting any time, I quickly pulled out my phone and called the police, simultaneously memorizing the van's license plate. Everything happened so fast. I could feel my heart racing with unease, but I didn't have time to think. While waiting for the police, I decided to go to the boy who had run into the store. I needed to calm him down and check if everything was okay. I went into the store, although troubling questions kept spinning in my mind. Why was this boy in such a hurry? And what really happened to the other two teenagers? The store was still operating, with a few customers leisurely strolling between the aisles. There was nothing suspicious about them, and everything seemed normal. I saw the boy standing near the merchandise display, looking very nervous. I approached him and quietly asked, "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" The boy immediately looked around, his eyes full of panic. He answered in a confused tone, I don't know. I just heard them talking. They said they would take us if we didn't go with them. I just ran because I couldn't stay." His voice was trembling, and there was something in it that made me realize this was more serious than I initially thought. What could have made this teenager so terrified that he ran away from a stranger? I tried to reassure him. "It's going to be okay. I already called the police. Hang in there, they'll be here soon." But suddenly, I felt that something was wrong. From the surveillance monitor, I saw the black van leave the store's premises. But what was worse, it turned back through the second exit as if it was waiting for something. A deep sense of dread filled my heart. I turned back to the boy. He looked like he was hiding something, but I didn't have time to ask more questions. What concerned me was the van that had left, now seemingly returning. Something about this situation felt so unreal and unsettling that it wouldn't leave my mind. The police arrived shortly after, and I went with them to follow up on the latest information about the van. But what we found next defied all explanation. The police reviewed the footage from the security cameras, and what they saw left everyone speechless. The black van had driven out through the second exit, but at the moment it turned around, its windows became clearer. However, what they saw in the video was even stranger. In one of the frames, there was not just one person sitting behind the wheel. Not even two. It looked as though, at the moment the van turned, it became filled with dark silhouettes moving inside. Their faces were hidden, but their presence was almost physically palpable. "This is some kind of monster on wheels," one of the officers said, reviewing the footage. "This can't be explained," added another. "We need to find this van, and fast." I stood there listening to their conversation, feeling the anxiety in my chest intensifying. The boy I had brought into the store was standing nearby, and it seemed like he was experiencing this just as much as I was. "Did you find anything?" he asked. "We need to check all the streets, all possible places." "Stay here while we figure out what's going on," one of the officers replied. We all waited. A few minutes passed, but to me, it felt like an eternity. I could feel the tension hanging in the air, as if everything had happened suddenly and without warning. We were at a dead end, with no idea what would happen next. But suddenly, someone came running toward us. "You won't believe this," one of the officers shouted. "We found something in the van." Everyone rushed to the car, and I realized they were hiding something. The feeling of fear only intensified as we reached the location. There, under the cover of darkness, stood the van, the same black vehicle I had seen earlier. But it wasn't empty. The van was filled with some boxes, and on the floor were strange drawings and mysterious symbols, resembling runes, painted in red. They emitted a mysterious light, as if they carried a kind of magic that was impossible to explain. "This isn't just a gang or child abductors," one of the detectives said. "This is something much darker." Suddenly, new details began to surface. Why had these particular children fallen under their influence? Why did their van and their secret seem like more than just a crime, but part of something larger? They weren't just working for money, they were working for something else. The boy we had brought into the store seemed like he hadn't told us everything that had happened. And when I looked at him, seeing his facial expression, I understood, he knew something. Something he might want to tell, but perhaps it was beyond his understanding. I turned back to him and asked, "What did they say?" "You know this isn't just an abduction. This is something bigger." The boy trembled, and his eyes quickly turned toward the store doors, as if he was trying to avoid my questions. But his silence couldn't hide the truth. They said they needed someone special. I didn't understand why, but this is no longer just a threat. They're looking for people like me. Now I understood, they weren't just abducting children. They were looking for a specific type of person, and this had to be part of a bigger plan. What were they planning? And how did this all connect to what had happened now? We stayed in place, and with each passing minute, the tension grew unbearable. The more I learned, the more I realized that what was happening wasn't just a random series of crimes, but part of a much larger, darker network that spanned not only our city but likely the entire country. I couldn't shake the thought of the boy who was only a few steps away from me. He wasn't just an ordinary teenager who had gotten caught in a dangerous situation. He seemed like part of something bigger. Something that was trying to pull him in. I turned to him, trying to speak calmly. "You're not telling me everything, are you?" I asked. "What did they say to you? I want to know the whole truth." He looked at me, his eyes dark, as if he was hiding something worse than just fear. He was silent for a few seconds, but I could feel that now he was about to reveal something bigger than I could imagine. They said it's not just about crimes. It's part of a bigger plan, he began quietly. They're looking for people who have abilities. You won't understand, but I'm not one of them. I don't know how it happened, but they knew about me before I even knew about myself. I stopped, trying to make sense of his words. Abilities. What was he talking about? It was something bigger than I could imagine. I asked him what he meant, but the boy just shook his head. It's not just a regular crime. They're looking for people they can control. And I'm probably one of them. At that moment, I realized the story was getting even more complicated. What had started as just a child abduction had become part of a plan that looked like a conspiracy, perhaps even more than just a criminal gang. These people weren't just stealing, they were looking for those who could serve them for something else, perhaps even for dark experiments. At this point, one of the officers approached us. "We found a few suspicious locations that could be hideouts for these people. We need to act fast," he said. They were really prepared for this. We found more vans belonging to the same people. We immediately set off for the location the officer indicated. It was an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. Its exterior showed signs of having been in use for many years. However, as we got closer, I felt the air grow still again, as if something invisible was watching us. We entered the building. And then things got even stranger. The space was filled with all sorts of objects, boxes, old furniture, scattered belongings. But in the very center of the room were walls covered in the same runes we had seen in the van. And on one of the walls was another drawing, this time more detailed, a map of the city with markings on different locations. I approached, trying to understand what it meant. The map marked places where similar incidents had occurred before, but there were other points with no logical explanation. "These are their hideouts. They've created a network," one of the detectives said. "But what's with the map? Why have they marked these places?" We didn't know the answer, but the feeling that we were getting closer to something worse only intensified. As we left the building, I felt that something in the city couldn't be explained with words. It was more than just a criminal organization. It was something dark, ancient, that was watching us, manipulating us like chess pieces. And I knew that if we didn't stop them now, it could be the beginning of something horrifying. I turned to the boy who was standing beside me, his face twisted with worry. "You said they're looking for people like you. What does that mean?" I asked. He replied. "They're not just looking for us. They want us to become part of their plan. And I don't know what will happen next." We stood in silence, only a few sighs breaking the tense atmosphere. I realized that everything I had touched was much bigger than just a coincidence. It wasn't a random abduction or robbery, this was a complex and dangerous plan, with a dark force at its center, manipulating people like chess pieces. I looked at the boy, who was no longer just a witness to the events. He had become part of this story, part of something bigger than we could imagine. "You're not alone, do you understand?" I said, trying to calm him. "We'll find a way to stop them." We headed back to the store, where people were still working. Walmart hadn't stopped, just as before. But I could no longer feel the same atmosphere that had been there before. Now, everything around me seemed distorted, as if this building were just a small part of something much larger and darker that existed beyond its walls. The police continued working on the investigation. Enough evidence had been gathered to understand that these people, involved in abductions and manipulations, had much deeper roots and resources than we had imagined. Detectives launched an active operation, trying to find all the locations marked on the map we had discovered. However, the feeling that we were only beginning to untangle this knot never left me. It was like discovering part of an ancient puzzle, where each piece pointed to something even more terrifying. Day and night, we worked alongside the police, investigating suspicious locations, checking basements, abandoned buildings, and even old tunnels under the city. Eventually, we found their main base, a vast underground lair filled with complex machinery, computers, and machines collecting information about people from all over the city. Here, in the darkness, we realized that these people were trying to create their own army, an army of those who could be controlled. In the end, we managed to block their network and communications, but behind every step of their activity, there was something bigger, darker. Had we stopped them completely? No. But we had come closer to their end. The boy I had been trying to protect remained safe for a time. But I knew that these people wouldn't give up so easily. They would continue searching for new candidates, new victims for their experiments. Every time I passed by Walmart, where everything looked just like before, a regular store, I felt the sensation that around every corner, the next step in this dangerous game awaited me. But I decided I wouldn't give up. I wouldn't give up until I found and destroyed this dark force hiding behind the mask of ordinary people. So, I stayed to watch. And to act when the time came.